G'day, I'm Damo from CompNow and welcome to Shortcuts and Jamf APIs. I am going to be taking you through a journey, I suppose, through looking at the Jamf APIs, what they can do, how they can enhance your Jamf experience, but then also how you can access those APIs with shortcuts. I'm going to go through exactly how you put them together, some hints and tips, some key actions and recommendations like that, and then get into some examples featuring Jamf Pro and Jamf School. After the examples, I will take you through a bit more advice on how to use them, how to share them, how you can go further, etc., etc. And at the end of the presentation, I will be giving you a link for you to be able to download your own copies of the shortcuts that I'm talking about in the session and some more, so you can start experimenting straight away. So before we get into that though, but first a little bit about CompNow. We've spent over 30 years supporting Australia's IT needs. We're Australia's largest Apple partner for enterprise and edu. We do sales, support, service training, modern deployments, engineering, basically anything you can think of to get your IT humming along in a workplace or a school or anywhere. CompNow and Jamf have been partners since Jamf came to the Australian New Zealand market in 2010. We've got over 35 certified engineers, over 250,000 seats, and we are approaching 1,000 Jamf customers. So it's definitely a big thing for us. About me, I've been at CompNow for about a year, but that journey has, in the Apple technology world, been happening since 2011. I spent my time in Apple retail for a few years, worked at an education reseller. I've been a customer as an ICT manager for a little primary school, and have been at CompNow in a few different roles for over a year now, and I'm currently a pre-sales engineer. So, as relevant to today's session, I love automation, in particular the Shortcuts app, but also do quite a lot with home automation as well. Shout out to Home Assistant. I'm also something of an augmented reality hype man, have done a few presentations on that, and very keen to see what impact that has over the next couple of decades in particular. I've got a bit of a background in broadcasting, communications, and working for a few non-profits as well. So I was actually 30 by the time I started working in technology. So it's been an interesting sort of road, and it's interesting to see how that different background without a pure IT sort of history behind me introduces some possibilities, some new ways of thinking about things as well. So about this session, it comes directly from my time, as I mentioned before, being an ICT manager in a primary school in regional Victoria. I was using Jamf School at the time, and often, and those education IT admins will know what this is like, you need a little bit more dynamic access to all the power of your MDM. Carrying around a Mac when you're going into a classroom isn't always practical, and it's also an environment where iPads are quite prevalent as well. Certainly they were at my school. So I started to think about how I could take advantage of Jamf, and being the ICT manager and capable of making my own decisions about the format of asset tags, basically decided to make QR codes with the serial number and then have those on the asset tag as well, which has facilitated a lot of the coolness here. Not the only way you can get the serial number, but it's the preferred way. Introducing this use of shortcuts in a management sort of context is something I'm very, very keen to see what more seasoned admins, people with potentially a more formal IT background, might be able to do with what I show you today. Because with some simple yet powerful workflows, you basically have the command of Jamf in your pocket. So let us begin by covering off some of the Jamf API background. I'm going to be starting with the Jamf Pro API. I'm going to then get into the Jamf School API. I'm going to talk a little bit about the barriers to API usage and why it might not be as easy for people to get involved with the APIs as it first seems. After that, going to talk about the scenario in which, sure, you already know how the APIs work, you've got some experience with them, you're a seasoned admin, probably done your Jamf 300, but even when you're quite skillful with the APIs, can you use them as much as you might be able to if you're only using them in terminal on a Mac? So let's get into it. Jamf Pro has two different APIs. There's the Jamf Pro API, which is the newer one, still not quite as fully featured, but there is the classic API, which has been around for some time, is very fully featured, but is probably not going to be around for terribly long. So you have as much access to the under the hood or under the bonnet side of Jamf through the classic API as you could hope for. Authentication is basic auth, which makes it very simple. You can interact with it as JSON and XML. A couple of caveats around the types of requests you're making requiring one or the other. And as I mentioned before, with the Jamf Pro API having features added and being positioned by Jamf as the newer and better way of doing things after a certain point potentially, we do know that the classic API may not be around for too long and its days are numbered. So moving on to the Jamf School API. It's also fully featured. It's also one of two APIs that you can access, just like Jamf Pro. There is the Jamf School API 2.0 that is in beta currently as well. So just like with the Jamf Classic API for Jamf Pro, I've chosen this one because it's fully featured, it's reliable as it is. However, it is going to be something that, without having a particular date for it, we will see go away at some point in favour of version 2. So the difference between this and the Jamf Pro, the difference between this and the Jamf Pro Classic API is that this is all JSON if you want it to be, which fits in with how shortcuts like to operate very nicely as well. Onto those barriers to wider use. So first and foremost, Jamf's UIs, particularly in Jamf Pro, which has seen a lot of evolution, Jamf School to a lesser extent, but they've become very, very capable at doing pretty much everything an admin needs to do, albeit manually. So unless you get to a certain level of complexity in your environment or you have quite a specific sort of need, you are going to have difficulty finding a need for API usage. They are seen as advanced knowledge, and I think this has a lot to do with it being content that's included in the Jamf 300 course. And I think having it on that second formal certification, I know there's the 100 and everything, and that's great, but starting with the 200, I think that's what a lot of people see as the basic side of using Jamf and the nuts and bolts, like essentials. The 300 is amazing for the scripting side of it and the advanced special ops type approach to device management. But I think that then means that the APIs are put behind a certain experience barrier for a lot of admins, especially those starting out, those who are new to managing Apple devices at all, let alone advanced sort of functionality. And having done my 300 not too long ago, actually, the curl commands can be quite daunting if you don't have a scripting background, if you don't have a formal IT background. So those are some of the reasons that I've been able to come up with for looking at how use of the API seems to be restricted to a certain degree. Rightly or wrongly, it seems like it's advanced knowledge to a lot of people. And also on the other side of that coin, even if you do have good knowledge of scripting, all of this sort of stuff, as I was saying earlier, usually you interact with APIs on a Mac in terminal scripting. It's kind of a programmatic way of working with the APIs. It's somewhat reactive in the sense that you don't have the ability to dynamically use an API. It's almost always in the form of a script. And as I was saying earlier, if you're an IT admin that needs to be up and about away from their desk, it can be very difficult to use those APIs on the go. Some may even say it's impossible. So with that as a bit of a background to the two Jamf APIs we'll be focusing on today, the barriers, the limits, let's now get into a little bit about how shortcuts can make all of that a lot simpler. So I'm going to cover a few different areas under this general topic. Going to look at shortcuts for admins as opposed to shortcuts for your everyday personal use. Going to look at some of the inputs that you can pipe into your shortcut to start all the automations flowing. We're going to look at making the API calls with shortcuts and then working with responses. So, shortcuts for admins. It's built into every major Apple operating system now. macOS is the newest and has, in this community, for obvious reasons, gotten a lot of coverage recently, but iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, watchOS, and macOS all have ways to interact with shortcuts. Some platforms fewer than that, Apple TV, for example. However, there is now an ability for basically every type of Apple device to interact with shortcuts. That's what you should be focusing on. Shortcuts is far more capable than a lot of people realize as well. A classic use case is setting up a morning or a good night routine, especially if you've got home automation, that sort of thing. I know sending an ETA to your partner leaving work, that's been quite a common usage of it as well, underutilized in the work from home era, I'm sure. But aside from the things that you might first have pop into your head when you think about shortcuts, there are a lot of tools that it provides that can make life easier for admins. So to quickly go through those, you can run scripts from shortcuts, seen here on a Mac. You can drop in any of your current scripts into this action and have variables pipe in or out of it as well. So straight out of the gate, you might be able to do a little bit more with your scripts if you're holding them in shortcuts. You can run scripts over SSH from your mobile. So I've used this in a variety of ways, pinging my Synology at home for an uptime, potentially updating a Plex library with a Siri command, things like that. There are some very cool things you can do with scripts over SSH. You can add conditional logic. Seems quite simple, I suppose, as a, hey guys, this is really cool. But when you're stitching together what can turn out to be quite complex API calls and those sorts of things, and thinking about device commands, maybe having different formats depending on what you're wanting to do, the if statements allow you to incorporate those other sources of direction, all of those sorts of things as well. Just add that logic in. You can ping for device and network details of the device that's running the shortcut to then incorporate those into other aspects of API calls or other uses of shortcuts as well. It can be a lot easier to have a shortcut pull a whole bunch of information from a device than it is to tell a user to open settings, go to general, go to about, etc., etc., etc. Help them, help us, help them, help us, I think, is the logic behind that one. You can generate QR codes as well with shortcuts. And I think that in particular, in this day and age, at least from an Australian point of view, we've had QRs everywhere for COVID. And I know in most countries around the world, that's been the case. So a QR is just a fancy way of representing a string. So you can put basically anything into a QR code, as I have done to great effect with the serial numbers, as we'll see in a bit. So there are some variations between operating systems and devices. So to quickly just go through those ones, macOS, it's the newer one, but again, coming down to some technical details about how the various operating systems work, macOS is not yet at a point where it can be as fully featured for shortcuts as iOS or iPadOS. But it's great with files. There are some more Mac-specific actions and functionality within shortcuts that can really help admins do a little bit more, and potentially less experienced admins who know you can do so much, but maybe aren't great at scripting, can look at doing that sort of stuff as well. iOS, well, Shortcuts has its origins in an iOS app called Workflow that was third-party until Apple acquired it and became Shortcuts. So it's the original way to use Shortcuts. It's the most fully featured. iPhones have the most sensors, cameras, all of those sorts of things. So it is a very, very capable way of doing it. That's why it's the primary device I'll be using in my examples a little bit later on. But you can equally look at iPadOS almost in the same way. It just doesn't have NFC for tags. Not that that's really a focus of the session today, but that's pretty much the only major difference between the two. And is shortcuts for automation on Apple devices the new normal? Will it be soon? We've seen, as I mentioned before, Workflow started as a third-party app. It was out 2014, 15 potentially. Apple had acquired it within a few years and it became Shortcuts. But of course, on the Mac, we've got a much longer and richer history of automation. There is the Automator app itself, which I think is the one that should be most fearful of Shortcuts coming in and eating its lunch. Shortcuts has a more logical, approachable way of doing many of the same things that Automator has been known for. And I think it's, as I have put in the slide here, it's had a good run. No disrespect to Sal Segoyan, but I think Shortcuts is very easily going to supplant Automator on the Mac platform. There won't be any deprecation of scripting functionality anytime soon. I hope not ever. But looking at how Shortcuts is, well, it's been on a journey from third party to Apple app, but optional. Now it's built in. You could delete it from your device if you want to, but it's Apple's default that it's part of the operating system and there to be used. So I think we've got an interesting few years ahead of us, and we're not going to be able to get out our crystal ball terribly accurately and see how this pans out. But I think Shortcuts is definitely something for you to be spending a decent amount of time on at the moment. So let's look at the different inputs that you can pipe into a shortcut for APIs. We have scan QR or barcode. It's the best one that I've been able to work out, definitely on the QR side of things. The barcode, it's the same action, so I've mentioned it there. QR codes are almost, in some cases, recognized by the device camera instantly. You'll see in some of the example videos that I've taken that there are some very, very quick reads there. Blink and you miss it sort of fast. So I would highly recommend, if you're able to, put at least a little QR of just the serial number on your asset tags on your devices to open up a lot of the possibilities we're talking about here. It's not the only way of doing it though. You might want to extract text from an image And you might be thinking, Damo, it's a live text world we're living in. You can just do that. That's not supported by shortcuts currently. So there is the ability to automate the taking of a photograph, and then you can extract text from that photograph. It's not as accurate as live text at the moment, and I've found it to be quite problematic on the Mac side of things. However, it's a workaround if the QR side of things isn't doable for whatever reason. This is another good one. And also, as another good second best option, get clipboard. So, and it could be quite handy on a Mac in particular, where you know the serial number, you've been asked to do something to a serial number in an email or however it's come through to you. Just select that serial number, Command-C to copy it, and then click on this shortcut. It'll pull the clipboard down and use that as a variable to do what it needs to do in the rest of the workflow. So, making API calls. I'm going to cover off some of the key actions to do it. Talk a little bit about modularity, which is very important from my point of view. I'm going to chat a little bit about the authentication and authorization side of things, and then a little bit about JSON versus XML. So, key actions. I'm running through these not necessarily in order of importance, but order in which you would use them in your shortcuts. So, base 64 encode and decode. This is how you encode your basic authorization. Really simply, it differs for Jamf School and Jamf Pro. Jamf School, it's a token and a code. Jamf Pro, it's a username and password for the API user that you have set up for that specific reason with limited permissions. Let's not gloss over that part of it. But once you've got those details in there, first element, colon, second element, and then you can pass those through the base 64 encode action, and it's in the format that the API needs it to be in. Get contents of URL. This is the big one. So this is the action that actually makes that call. This is the equivalent to the curl command in terminal. So put your URL in, choose your request type, add headers, add auth, add body in the form of JSON or a form or a file. I've used the file one because of the XML implications. We'll get into that in a moment. Run shortcut is another very handy one, and this ties directly into the modularity conversation that we'll have in a moment. So you will need to reuse different elements of these API calls in different ways. So it's very, very much worthwhile. After you've started experimenting around a little bit, or you've had a look at these shortcuts and had some ideas, you will quickly be able to see what you can turn into a shortcut of its own, into which you pipe a variable from the main shortcut, does whatever it needs to do, and then it brings the result back in to continue into the main shortcut and go on. So I'll show you a little bit more when we get into the detail about how some of these shortcuts are made, but that is a very handy action indeed. And leading us right to modularity. So it's a very similar concept to scripts with placeholders. As I was saying before, you will find ways to be, I guess, a little bit more efficient when you use shortcuts to handle a chunk of an operation for the main shortcut. They're very handy for similar types of calls. Device commands, for example, you can very easily adapt a general device command API call by incorporating a different shortcut that maybe chooses from a list of commands. You can run into a lot of trouble if you don't put effort into naming icon color conventions as well. when we get into the shortcuts in a moment, I will show you how I've approached that. But if you get to the point like me where you've got dozens, I've probably got around 150 API-related, Jamf API-related shortcuts at the moment. So naming conventions really help, especially when you're putting together a conference presentation. It just reduces shortcuts to standard workflows, fewer moving parts. Like if you know that this modular shortcut works fine as long as the right variables are piped into it, it's fewer moving parts, fewer points of failure. It reduces the risk of errors. So very important for you to take advantage of modularity as much as possible. On the authentication side, my first recommendation, along the lines of it being not entirely great practice to put your credentials in plain text into a terminal-based API call, use a companion app. There are a variety of companion apps. I will be telling you about 4 a little bit later on, but you can have them store your credentials. So all the shortcut itself sees is a variable. Call it in. I use variables for not only the authentication, but also the URL itself. URL is probably not entirely necessary, but just in terms of sharing shortcuts around, which I hope those of you who maybe are interested in what I'm talking about will be experimenting a bit. You might be wanting to share your shortcuts. So having this as a sort of a break for that credential sharing, even if you share the entire shortcut, is a very worthwhile one. So basic authentication in API calls is an absolute breeze. I'll show you in detail exactly about that shortly, but I'm not using the Jamf Pro API, so I haven't covered off token-based authentication at all. It's out of scope for today's presentation. So absolutely doable, and something I'm sure when the Jamf Pro API comes out in earnest, maybe when Classic's deprecated, I'll be, months past having cracked that particular nut. So very straightforward. On the authentication side of things, verging into security, I mentioned it before, and you are told this in your Jamf 300 when you learn it officially, but have a separate API account for your API calls, potentially have multiple, depending on the complexity of your environment, and only apply permissions that are required for the API calls that it needs to make. If you need to make a new API call, jump in and add your permissions. In the resources I provide to you, I will have a link to Jamf's documentation, which gives you a great rundown of what permissions are required for each type of call. And then finally, for those of us speaking English but not speaking US English, I just want to I debated whether or not I should share this, but we're all humans, folks. I can tell you I've made an error or two in my time. There was a delay of months when I first had this idea where I was sure everything was right, the URLs formatted correctly, like what I was trying to do should have worked. I was spelling authorization with an S and not a Z. So folks from Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, potentially Canada, it needs to be authorization with a Z or Z, as the people who spell it that way call it. So a trap for young players there. If you're just starting out with APIs, it's a Z. Moving on. JSON versus XML. So when you look into the shortcuts, API support, articles, and all of that sort of stuff, it's pretty clearly communicated that shortcuts prefer prefer JSON. XML is required for some APIs. There are ways to support it, but it's better if you can just use JSON. So I suppose the Jamf Pro API, being JSON first, is going to play a little bit more nicely with shortcuts. So we've got that to look forward to. So XML's a bit clunky in some people's opinions, not everybody's favorite, and particularly navigating your way through it with curl commands in terminal and all of that can get a little bit annoying, but it's very functional. It wouldn't be as widely used as it is if it didn't have some merit. So it is the biggest difference from terminal commands that you can actually use JSON here. And as I was saying before, this is definitely the case with the Jamf Pro API, the new one, but newer ones seem to be moving towards JSON generally. So it's just another way that Shortcuts is pretty well set up to work with APIs. Now, working with responses, we've got some key actions and some other information as well. So getting right into it, getting a dictionary value. So whatever comes before it, you say, get the value for whatever key it is. So you've got to know what the key is, but there are ways to know that ahead of time. Sometimes you've just got to make the call and see what comes back. But that's probably the key one for all of this after get contents of URL. We have repeat for each. Sometimes you might find that you get an array for extension attributes in particular. Having repeat for each just means you write once what you want. So for an extension attribute, as we'll see in a little while, you want the name of the value for the name key, and you want the value for the value key. So if you just want those 2 bits of information from each one, there are ways to just drop that into a repeat for each. Very straightforward. Text, very basic for me to include it, but the text block in Shortcuts is just a wonderful space for you to be able to put your different elements together to then pass that text block as a URL, or it could be a list of the different values that you've pulled from the APIs, as we'll see in a moment. And run shortcut is, again, a very, very handy option for working with the responses as well. Again, the modularity side of things, I'm saying it again, I haven't mucked up the order of my slides. It's that important. Make sure that you're repeating and reusing chunks of your API calls, working with the responses as different shortcuts to make your life easier. When it comes to outputting from the shortcut, so you've made the calls, you've got the information that you want, but what do you do with it? There are ways that you can pipe response data into other shortcuts. You can display responses on the device. That's the primary way of getting information. The first shortcuts that I'll show you kind of relate to that side of things. You can send that information out of Jamf to other systems. Potentially, depending on your environment, it may work that putting a shortcut together for your users might ping Jamf for some API information and then bring it back to the shortcut, then pipe it through to maybe your help desk software, some other sort of incident reporting type log. There are so many different ways for you to be able to then use this information. And with the API side of things, obviously most of the systems we're working with nowadays have APIs. So that's going to be very handy indeed. Now we get to the examples. Finally, this is what you've all come for. So very simply with my examples, I am going to give an overview of what the shortcut's like, what modularity has been involved, anything particular about that type of API call. And then I've got some quick videos of those shortcuts in action. So the first one we have here is get Mac computer and user information. So we have the video starting up here now, and just scrolling through it there, you can see there's a couple of different shortcuts right at the top, but this is mostly all get value from dictionary. Various dictionaries, sometimes the value you get is a dictionary itself, and then you need to do more. We can see here that repeat for each for the extension attributes, and then we look down here to the text block where I've piped all the variables in, so it will tell me a whole lot of information about that particular device and the user itself. So jumping into some of the other shortcuts here, coming back to the inputs, Macs can't read QR codes. So a bit of logic here. If it's a Mac, it'll go to the take a photo and extract text from image. If it's not, it'll just scan a QR code. And here is the actual API call shortcut here. So the main shortcut is mostly about working with the information that this shortcut provides. So what does that look like in action? This is what it looks like. So we tap the shortcut, scan the QR, nice quick read. It's working in the background there, and it showed up the little description there that I put in with the user notes and everything there. If you think I'm glossing over some of the detail here, reminder, you'll be getting access to these shortcuts yourself. So as it's a virtual session, you'll be able to rewatch the presentation and have the shortcuts there with you to kind of follow along on your device. So if you think I'm glossing over things, that's semi-intentional, got a lot to cover. Next, we are looking at another shortcut for the Mac side of things. I believe this is a Mac command. So not much to look at there. Here's the video that shows you how awesome that can be. So I tap the shortcut on my phone, just lower the lid a bit to scan the QR code there. And what it does here is pop up a list of all the Mac commands you can apply. So I tap that one and hey presto, the device Bluetooth has changed. Very cool. And I love being able to select through the different options there as well. And we're going to look at adding to a group now. So what we have is a very straightforward shortcut. You don't need to look at the device. This is all just based on the QR code. And what it will do, this is where we get into a bit of XML. You can see there's a text block there with the right data. So that text block is then saved into iCloud Drive as a text file, and then that file is piped through as the body of the API call. So this is one that you can adapt and reuse. It's not in this example shortcut, but we do have a way for you to add additional bits of information along the lines of additional computer IDs if you've got more than one that you want to do. So the examples that I'll have up on our website for you to look at will include that functionality as well. So that looks like this in real life. So it's a little bit difficult to see here, but that's the Jamf Pro group page there. And there was no check mark against that device serial number, but I'll refresh the page here and go into assignments and you will be able to see it there. So a really great way for you to, when you're physically near a device, put it into a particular group. I've often thought about this one being used for HR have handed you a whole bunch of laptops from departed staff members and you know you've got to just wipe them, all of that sort of stuff. You can use this shortcut to add them to a group so that they're in the system and they can all be acted on en masse. Or you can even apply the commands directly by the shortcut we saw just before. So great flexibility there. Moving across onto the device side now. So it's a very similar one. I won't spend a lot of time on it because it's basically the same thing we saw in the first example, but for the device. So we tap it, we scan the QR, it runs a few different shortcuts, and again, we have that information pop up on our device there. Check who's the user, all of that sort of stuff. You can, of course, choose whatever information you want on that little summary, but it's a very handy one. Again, this is a device command. I think let's just get across to the example there. This one, I believe, is a restart. So tap the shortcut, scan the QR, just lift it up there so you can see what's happening on the device. And so I've got a whole bunch of commands there. And where's restart device? Tap that, hey presto, it completes running and it's in the process of restarting. So all sorts of fun you can have applying commands right there. And we see the apple coming up. We know it's restarting. We don't need to actually see it get to the home screen. Let's move on. And adding a device to a group. Very, very similar to the Mac one. Let's get right into the example. Here we are. So tap add to group. Again, this is one shortcut to add to a specific group. Nothing stopping you from doing something along the lines of the device command one, where you can grab a list of all your groups and just choose which one to add it into. So there we go. Again, looking in Jamf Pro, it wasn't ticked. Refresh the page after having run the API, and there we go. Now, finishing off somewhat nostalgically with the shortcut that kind of started me down this entire way. This is the Jamf School API call for device and user info. Interestingly, on the Jamf School side of things, there's no separation of Mac and mobile device. It's just device. So it's a little bit simpler to work with, but you get all of that information there. And as it's quite similar to the other ones, let's just quickly have a look here. And this is actually an iPhone that I bought from the principal of the school that I worked at for 20 bucks. So somewhat appropriate for me to be including it here. And just like we saw before, we've got the lovely little pre-organized list of properties there from the API. So to quickly go through advice on usage, we've got companion apps, some ideas for sharing and launching, bit of a wish list, and what you can do going further. We're getting right down to the closing stages now, folks. So I've got these 4 companion apps. They are incredible time savers if you're doing a lot of this sort of stuff. So to quickly jump in, Toolbox Pro, made by a lovely guy called Alex Hay. He's very active on the Shortcuts and Toolbox Pro subreddits. Great guy. It's a collection of advanced actions. So it is an app that basically exists to provide functionality and abilities into shortcuts. And some really cool ones, particularly for a more adminish type of use. But the key one for our purposes is global variables. It's what I've used and referred to earlier on as holding my Jamf Pro URL or Jamf School URL and the authentication credentials as well. So there are some advanced features that are behind an in-app purchase, but global variables, I double checked, and they are part of the free offering. So nothing stopping you from taking advantage of that. Another app by Alex, much newer, but oh boy, it made my life so much easier. It is a console app. So you are able to just drop in an action from Logger, log message, give it a title if you want. There are a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. And then whatever the content of that action is gets piped across for you to inspect, just like you do in a console when you're coding on your Mac. So very, very handy and hugely useful when prototyping. It's a paid app though, no free tier, and it is somewhat pricey, $10 US, about 15 Australian. You will know how that equates in your particular area as well. So I would highly recommend just ponying up for that. It would save you hundreds of times that in terms of your hourly rate when you're using it, if you're doing a lot of shortcuts as well. JSON is another great one, made by Simon Stervering. I believe you pronounce his surname like that. So it's a JSON viewer and parser. You can have the raw plain text, or you can have a formatted sort of view, which really can be helpful if you're dealing with a massive response from an API, just to work out how you need to hierarchically get to where you want to go. So it'll also store and retrieve JSON files. So JSON will hold little snippets of JSON code for you to bring into a shortcut for whatever you need to do. So it's very handy in that regard. And very quickly, just to give you an idea about how those three work together, we have here the standard get user and device info shortcut you've seen here before, but I'm adding in a log message action, just dragging it in there from that dozen or so different options there are in Logger. So when I run that shortcut here and look at Logger being in split screen there, scan the QR code, away we go, and it runs the shortcut fully. I'll dismiss that, but you'll also see here in Logger, there's a lovely little bit of JSON there, which plain text is like fine, but as I was saying earlier, JSON makes it easier to look at, and here is how easy it is. So you've got all of your different dictionaries in there. There are the arrays and whatnot. So if you're not familiar with JSON, if this type of coding is difficult for you, this can really make your life so much easier. So I just quickly want to chat about one more app as well. It's another one of Simon's apps. It's Data Jar. That name's probably familiar to this audience, but there's a space there, guys. It's, I guess, in a similar sort of way to global variables, being a place outside of shortcuts, you can store information, write to it, retrieve it, all of that sort of stuff. But it's a bit more customized for a developer sort of purpose. So it's not a global variable, can be a dictionary, could be a Boolean value, could be an integer string, whatever. You declare the types a little bit more in Data Jar, and we can make it a little bit easier to be on top of your advanced shortcut usage as well. So definitely check that one out. It's awesome. And so Alex and Simon, both very big supporters of shortcuts for power users. Sharing. Once you've made these wonderful shortcuts, depending on what they're used for, the Jamf School one that I made to get the device and user info, I didn't necessarily make that for myself primarily. I made that for the teachers, and I put it onto their iPads so that they could tap a button on their home screen or jump into shortcuts and be able to run that, or run another one to get user notes. You can share this with them by getting the iCloud link for shortcuts. This is the primary method everybody's aware of. Share that link however you'd normally share a link. From an admin point of view, you can put that iCloud link into a web clip and send it out to the devices. Or it could be a self-service bookmark, a little bit easier on the Mac side. Or you can export the dot shortcut from a Mac and then just pass that file around as you would like. When it comes to launching them, shortcuts have URLs. Just like system prefs would be known to many Mac admins, you can pipe in a URL to go to a specific preference pane, or you could up to Monterey, including Monterey, maybe not Ventura. You can put that shortcuts open URL into a web clip. Clicking on that web clip, instead of like the previous one for sharing, it won't install the shortcut, it will run it. You can put it into a self-service bookmark. Clicking on that bookmark will run the shortcut. Or you can actually put that shortcut URL into a script. Not a bad way of doing it. There are other ways of launching a shortcut as well. Could be in the share sheet. on a Mac, you can put it in the menu bar. In all devices that have them, Macs, iPhones, iPads, you can put a shortcut in the dock. And as I referred to earlier, you can put them onto the home screen. Let's not forget about Siri as well. Some people call shortcuts Siri shortcuts, which is just a confusing naming thing. It's an aspect of what I'm talking about, but shortcuts is shortcuts. Anything that you put into a shortcut can be launched via Siri by just saying, hey, you know what, hey, dingbat, let's run that API call, or whatever you've titled it. So it can be really, really easy for you. Naming conventions have an influence on this, though, FYI. Onto the wish list. Locked shortcuts would be amazing. The term read-only is what I thought I should call this, but that isn't necessarily a great fit, because you still want data to be coming in, being managed, and output and all of that sort of stuff. But you wouldn't necessarily want a user to be able to amend the shortcut, repurpose it for their own potentially nefarious purposes. Also, it would be handy to prevent users from being able to see the contents of a shortcut if there are credentials in there, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be lovely. A bit of a leveling out of OS and device features would be great. I mean, hardware dependent, sure, but the fact that in the age of Apple Silicon, that the Mac camera isn't capable of reading a QR code is just incomprehensible to me. I don't get it. And also having live text as a shortcut action would be really great. And finally, of course, managed shortcuts. If we as admins can put scripts and whatever we want onto a device, if it makes our adminning easier, if it makes the user experience better, then some way to be able to put shortcuts onto a user's device, install them on there instead of having this multi-step process that you can't fully control to get them installed, that would really, really be amazing. And obviously the managed shortcuts would incorporate the locking and all of that, as I mentioned earlier on as well. So going further, r/shortcuts, the subreddit, is a wonderful spot for you to go. You will encounter a whole lot of noobish sort of questions that, well, you encounter in basically every IT forum, but there are some really cool things. As I mentioned before, people who make companion apps are quite active on there as well, and it's a great place for you to go to ask for any advice or hints or tips. Federico Vitici is quite a well-known person within the shortcuts sphere. He has been on a number of podcasts. He's from Mac Stories. He's on a lot of the Relay FM podcasts, in particular Connected. They deal with a lot of shortcuts there. But he and Fraser Spears, whose name is probably known to this audience as well, used to run a podcast called Canvas. I think it finished in 2018, but before it was even shortcuts, before Apple had acquired it, they did, I think, a 7-part series on workflow. So if you're interested in how it works, how it's a different type of automation than anything that's been on the Mac, because it was focusing on iOS-specific architecture, there's some really great information in there. A lot of it is superseded. Magic variables weren't even around while they did the main series. They came back a couple of weeks later and did an extra episode on magic variables. So a lot of it has dated, but this is an audience wherein there are members that love to take a deep dive, and that is the best possible deep dive there. So the other part of going further, though, is getting access to all of these shortcuts. Some other ones I haven't had time for. There will be information on the API documentation, advice, a few other resources, certain podcast episodes, everything I can think of that you might want to know about shortcuts will be in there. And thanks to the import questions feature in shortcuts, every one of these is going to be set up so that all you need to do to get them working is have the URL of your Jamf Pro and your authentication, and you will be able to start using these and tinkering around and playing around. And I am so keen to see what you all come up with. So please hit me up on Slack. Tell me about your testing, your experimenting. Ask me some questions. Why is it like that? Were you just being lazy, or is that how it has to be? Could be both. Make suggestions. Oh, have you thought about doing X, Y, or Z? I would love that. I've kind of been in my own little echo chamber. I tell some folks about this sort of stuff, but it's a little bit, I'll say it, it's a little bit weird to some admins why you'd muck around with it. But if this has inspired you, if you've got a great idea, let me know. Or just say hi. I need to use the Slack more. So give me an excuse to. That QR code will take you to my profile on the Mac admin Slack. So this is now the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for being with me here. It was a lot of information to get through, but I really do hope it's something that's going to be quite helpful for you. And thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed JNUC, enjoy the other sessions, and I'll see you on Slack. Thanks, guys.